The orc woman's hands were still dirty when Phillip Zane found her kneeling beside his eastern fence post, tucking something wrapped in oilcloth back into the earth. She froze like a rabbit caught in lantern light, her green fingers still pressed against the disturbed soil, and for a moment neither of them moved in the gathering dusk. He had only walked this way because his mill wheel had been running rough all afternoon, and he wanted to check the water level in the creek that fed it. But now he stood 10 feet from a woman he had been trading with for 3 months, watching her bury something she clearly did not want anyone to see. "Evening, Asha," he said quietly, keeping his hands visible and his voice level, the same tone he used with skittish horses. Asha Wrothe straightened slowly, her small tusks catching the last pink light of sunset as her jaw tightened. She was not a large woman despite her orc blood, built lean and strong like someone who had worked hard every day of her life, and the wariness in her dark eyes made her look even smaller. "I was just checking the fence," she said, and they both knew it was a lie. "My fence," Phillip said, not unkindly. "Your fence." She wiped her hands on her trousers, leaving dark smears. "I should have asked permission to be on your land after sundown. I apologize," he could have pressed. He could have demanded to know what she had buried, could have made a scene, could have done any number of things that would have been within his rights as the landowner. Instead, he looked at the fence post, then at her face, and made a decision that felt less like thinking and more like recognizing something true. "Fences need checking regular," he said. "You are welcome to check that post whenever you like, Miss Wrothe. No need to ask." The suspicion in her eyes was so thick he could have cut it with his mill blade. "Why?" "Because you bring me the best grain in 3 counties, you pay fair, and you have never once shorted me a measure or asked for credit you did not repay." He shrugged. "Seems to me a woman like that can check a fence post now and then." Asha stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her turning his words over like stones in a river, looking for the sharp edges underneath. Finally, she gave a single nod. "Thank you," she said, and the words sounded rusty, like she did not use them often. Phillip nodded back and continued on his way to the creek, but he thought about that oilcloth bundle all through the next day while he ground wheat and rye and barley into flour. He thought about the way her hands had been shaking when she stood up, and the way she had thanked him as though kindness were a foreign coin she did not quite trust the weight of. He had heard the stories, of course, about how orcs were cheated in trades, turned away from banks, robbed on the roads with no recourse because who would take an orc's word over a human's in any magistrate's hall? He had always figured the stories were exaggerated, the way stories usually were, but the look in Asha Wrothe's eyes had not been exaggerated. It had been the look of someone who had learned not to trust, and learned it the hard way. She came to the mill 3 days later with 2 sacks of rye, and she moved differently now when she looked at him, less like she was calculating the distance to the door and more like she was simply doing business. "Good rye," Phillip said, running a handful through his fingers to check the grain. "You want flour or coin?" "Half and half," Asha said, which was her usual arrangement. She watched him measure out her payment with the same careful attention she always did, those dark eyes tracking every movement of the scale, and he made certain to measure precisely, even generously. When he handed her the small leather purse of coins, she weighed it in her palm but did not open it to count. "You can count it if you want," Phillip said. "I will not be offended." "I know what it should weigh," Asha said and slipped the purse into her belt. "This is correct." "How many mills have shorted you?" The question came out before he could stop it, blunt and too personal, but he found he genuinely wanted to know. Her expression went carefully neutral. "Enough that I learned to judge weight by hand." "That is a useful skill and a damned shame you needed to learn it." He began measuring out her flour, scooping it into the cloth sack she had brought. "I served 7 years as a miller's apprentice before my uncle died and left me this place, and he taught me that a mill runs on reputation. You cheat a farmer once, you lose that farmer. You cheat enough farmers, you lose everything. Your uncle sounds like he was a wise man. He was a mean old bastard who once made me regrind an entire day's work because I let the stones run too hot and scorched the flour," Phillip said, surprising himself with the honesty. "But he was honest, and he taught me to be the same." Something shifted in Asha's face, a tiny relaxation around her eyes. "Mean and honest is better than kind and crooked. I will settle for trying to be both honest and kind, though I admit the kind part does not always come natural." He tied off her flour sack and set it beside the coins. "There. Fair measure." She hefted the sack, testing its weight the same way she had tested the coins. "Fair measure," she agreed, and this time when she looked at him, there was something new in her expression, something he could not quite name but that made him want to stand a little straighter. The days grew shorter, and the autumn work grew longer, and Asha came to the mill every week with grain to trade. Phillip learned that she worked a small farm north of town, just her and a hired hand during harvest season, growing rye and oats and some wheat on land she had bought outright 5 years ago. "Paid cash," she told him one afternoon while she waited for her flour to be ground. "The man selling it thought I had stolen the money. He counted it 3 times and held each coin up to the light like I might have made them out of tin and paint." "Had you?" Phillip asked, and was rewarded with a surprised laugh that showed her tusks. "No, but I was tempted to tell him I had, just to see his face." She was sitting on the bench outside his mill, watching the wheel turn in the stream. "I saved for 8 years to buy that land. 8 years of hiring out my labor, doing every job no one else wanted to do, and keeping every penny I did not need to survive." "Where did you keep it? Before you had the land, I mean." She gave him a long, measuring look. "Buried," she said finally. "Different places. Never the same place twice in a row. Never anywhere someone could find by accident. Not in a bank. Banks do not take ORC accounts, or they do, and then there is a mistake with the ledger, or a fee no one mentioned, or the bank fails and somehow only the ORC depositors lose everything." Her voice was matter of fact with no anger in it, which somehow made it worse. "So I learned to be my own bank." Phillip thought about the fence post and the oilcloth bundle and the way her hands had been shaking in the dusk. That must be a lonely way to live. "Lonely is safe," Asha said, and stood up to collect her flour. But she kept coming back every week, and the conversations grew longer. Phillip found himself looking forward to her visits, to the dry humor that surfaced when she felt comfortable, to the way she noticed things most people missed. She pointed out that his mill wheel was running slightly off true, which he had been attributing to the autumn drop in water level, and she was right. She mentioned that the road between her farm and the mill was developing a dangerous rut that would be an axle breaker by spring, and he rode out to confirm it and report it to the county. She told him about the fox that had been harassing her chickens, and he lent her a live trap and taught her how to bait it, and she brought it back 2 weeks later with a dozen eggs as thanks. It was small things, ordinary things, the sort of neighborly exchanges that happened in any farming community, except Phillip began to realize that for Asha, these things were not ordinary at all. Each small transaction seemed to surprise her, as though she kept expecting him to demand something extra, to change the terms, to reveal that the kindness had been a hook with a barb hidden inside. Winter came early that year, a hard frost in late October that killed the last of the kitchen gardens and sent everyone scrambling to finish their preparations. Asha arrived at the mill on a gray morning with her final harvest, 4 heavy sacks of rye that she had clearly been storing in her barn. "Last of it," she said, her breath misting in the cold air. "I will not have more until spring." Philip nodded and helped her carry the sacks inside, where the mill was blessedly warm from the friction of the grinding stones. He measured out her grain with his usual care, but when he went to calculate her payment, he paused. "I have a proposition," he said slowly. "More of a question, really." Asha's shoulders tensed. "What kind of question?" "The kind you can say no to without it changing anything between us." He met her eyes so she could see he meant it. "Winter is my slow season. Most folks have their grain ground by now, and I will not see heavy business again until after the spring planting. I do some repair work and carpentry to keep coin coming in, but it means I am away from the mill sometimes, and I worry about theft." "You want me to watch your mill?" "No." Philip took a breath. "I want to know if you would be willing to store some of your coin here over the winter." "In my strongbox. I have a good lock and a better hiding place, and if you kept your money here, you would not have to worry about it freezing or flooding or being dug up by animals." The silence that followed was so complete he could hear the creak of the mill wheel outside and the whisper of flour sifting through cloth. Asha's face had gone very still. "Why would you offer that?" "Because I think you are tired of digging in frozen ground," Philip said honestly. "And because I think you deserve to have at least one place where your money is safe without you having to bury it and hope. You want me to trust you." "I want to be worth trusting," he said. "There is a difference." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes, caution against hope, suspicion against the desperate desire to believe. Finally, she reached into her belt and drew out the small purse he had just paid her. "This," she said. "Just this for now. If it is still here when I come back in a week, we will talk about more." Philip took the purse with the seriousness it deserved, understanding that she was not handing him coins but a test, maybe the most important test anyone had ever given him. "I will put it in the strongbox now, and I will show you where I keep it, so you know I am not lying about the security." He led her to the back corner of the mill, where a loose board in the floor concealed a iron-banded chest bolted to the floor joists. He opened it so she could see inside, mostly empty except for his own small reserve of coins and a few important papers. He placed her purse inside, closed the lid and locked it with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. "There," he said. "Safe." Asha nodded, her expression unreadable, and left without another word. The week that followed was the longest of Philip's life. He found himself checking the strongbox twice a day, as though her purse might vanish if he did not watch it constantly, and he felt the weight of her trust like a physical thing. When she returned exactly 7 days later, he had the box open before she finished tying her horse outside. Her purse sat exactly where he had left it, and when she took it from his hands, she opened it and counted the coins slowly, right there in front of him. Philip watched without comment, understanding that this too was part of the test. When she finished counting, she looked up at him with something new in her eyes, something that might have been the beginning of wonder. "It is all here," she said. "Of course it is." "Of course," she repeated softly, as though trying out the phrase. Then she reached into her coat and drew out a larger purse, this one heavy enough to clink. "I want to leave this one too, with the first. Is that acceptable?" "More than acceptable." Philip took the second purse and placed it in the strongbox beside the first, and this time when he locked it, Asha was smiling, just barely but smiling. Over the winter she brought him more. Not all her money, he suspected, but some of it piece by piece, each purse a small act of faith. By the time the first snow fell, there were 6 small leather purses in his strongbox, each one representing a cache she had decided to trust him with rather than the frozen ground. She never asked to count them after that first time, but he could tell she thought about it, could see the old wariness surfacing whenever she came to add another purse, or, once, to take one back for a large purchase she needed to make. "You do not have to explain what you need it for," Phillip said as he handed her back one of the purses. "It is your money. I know." Asha weighed the purse in her hand. "But I am buying a new plow if you were curious. The old one finally broke past repair. A good plow is worth the investment." "That is what I thought." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for keeping these safe. Thank you for trusting me with them." Something in the way he said it made her look up sharply, and their eyes met and held. The mill was very quiet around them, just the two of them in the warm dimness, and Phillip felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. Asha was not beautiful in any conventional sense, with her green skin and her tusks and her rough farmer's hands, but there was something about her that made him want to keep looking, to learn every expression that crossed her face, to earn every small smile she gave him. "Phillip," she said, and his name in her mouth sounded like a question. "Asha," he answered and took a step closer. She did not step back. Instead, she reached out slowly and placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. He covered her hand with his own, and they stood like that for a moment that stretched and stretched, full of possibility and fear and something neither of them had quite named yet. Then she pulled back carefully and tucked the purse into her belt. "I should go," she said. "The roads will be bad if the temperature drops." "Be safe," Phillip said, and watched her leave, and knew with absolute certainty that he was falling in love with her. The winter deepened, and with it, their connection. Asha came to the mill even when she had no grain to trade, ostensibly to check on her money, but really, Phillip thought, for the same reason he found excuses to be there when he expected her visits. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, the small details of their daily lives. He learned that she loved thunderstorms and hated early mornings, that she could fix almost anything with enough wire and determination, that she had a singing voice she only used when she thought no one could hear. She learned that he had wanted to be a sailor when he was young but got seasick on boats, that he could not cook to save his life, that he still missed his uncle despite the old man's temper. They did not talk about what was growing between them, but it was there in every conversation, every shared smile, every moment when their hands brushed and neither pulled away. Phillip told himself he was being patient, giving her time, but the truth was he was terrified. Terrified that if he named what he felt, she would run. Terrified that she did not feel the same way. Terrified that even if she did, the world would not let them have it, a human man and an orc woman in a place where such things were not done. Spring arrived in fits and starts. Cold rain mixed with warmer days, and the farmers began preparing their fields. Asha came to the mill one afternoon in early March, muddy to the knees and exhausted, and said she needed to withdraw half her money for seed and supplies. Phillip opened the strongbox and helped her count out what she needed, and she sat on his bench afterward, too tired to ride home immediately. "I have been thinking," she said, staring out at the swollen creek. "Dangerous habit." She smiled despite herself. "I have been thinking that I need to check my other caches, the ones I kept buried. I have not looked at them since autumn, and I want to make sure they are still secure before I invest everything in the spring planting." Something cold touched the back of Phillip's neck. "Where are they?" "Scattered, different spots on my land and around it, places I thought were safe." She rubbed her face tiredly. "I know it sounds paranoid. It sounds sensible given your experiences." He hesitated. "Would you like company, an extra set of eyes?" Asha looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. "I would like that." They rode out together the next morning, Asha on her sturdy farm horse and Philip on his tall bay gelding. She led him to 5 different locations over the course of the day, a slow circuit of the countryside that revealed just how carefully she had planned her hiding places. One cache was buried beneath a distinctive rock formation on the edge of her property. Another was hidden in a hollow tree near the river. A third was under the floor of an abandoned trapper's cabin that most people had forgotten existed. Each time she dug carefully, brought up the oilcloth bundle, checked its contents, and reburied it with visible relief. But when they reached the 6th location, an old stone bridge over a dry stream bed, something was wrong. Philip saw it in the way she froze, staring at the disturbed earth beneath the bridge's north support. Someone had been digging, and recently. The hole was rough and careless, nothing like Asha's careful excavations, and it was empty. Asha knelt beside the hole and reached in as though the oilcloth bundle might still be there, just overlooked, but her hand came back full of nothing but dirt. Her face had gone blank, all the warmth draining out of it, and Philip recognized the look. It was the same expression she had worn that first evening by his fence post, the look of someone whose worst assumptions about the world had just been confirmed. "How much was it?" he asked quietly. 2 years' worth of savings. Her voice was flat. "Enough to buy another horse or repair my barn roof or survive a bad harvest. We will find who took it." "How?" She stood up, brushing dirt from her hands in short, angry movements. "I cannot report it stolen. I cannot prove it was ever here. I cannot go to the magistrate and say an orc's buried money was stolen, because they will ask why I had buried money in the first place. And the answer is that no one would let me keep it any other way." Philip wanted to argue to tell her it would be different, but he could not, because she was right. In a courtroom, it would be her word alone, and an orc's word was worth less than dirt to most judges. "Then we solve it ourselves," he said. "How? We start by looking at the evidence. This hole is fresh, dug within the last few days. The ground around it is torn up, which means whoever did it was in a hurry or did not care about being seen. That is sloppy, and sloppy people make mistakes." He examined the area more carefully, looking for anything that might tell them who had been there. "Here," he said after a moment, pointing to a clear boot print in the soft earth. "Large print, heavy tread, working boots probably, and here, see how the dirt is scattered." They threw it behind them as they dug, which means they were kneeling on this side. Asha came to stand beside him, looking at the evidence with new eyes. "You sound like a tracker." "My uncle used to hunt poachers. He taught me to read a scene." Philip studied the print, fixing its size and shape in his memory. "We need to find out who has been in this area recently, and who would have reason to know there was something buried here." They spent the rest of the day asking careful questions in the nearby village, posing as travelers looking for directions, paying attention to boots and behavior. It was Asha who spotted him, a young man lounging outside the tavern with mud still caking his boots, and a new money pouch on his belt that he kept touching like he could not quite believe it was there. Philip bought the man a drink and led the conversation carefully, and within an hour, they had a confession of sorts. The man, drunk and boastful, talked about finding treasure under a bridge, about how he had gotten lucky, about how he was going to use the money to leave this mud-hole town for good. "That is my treasure," Asha said, stepping into the conversation with her arms crossed. "My money that you stole." The man's face went ugly. "You cannot prove anything, orc finders keepers." "Thieves hang in this county," Philip said mildly. "Or did you forget that part? You have no proof." "I have your confession spoken in front of witnesses." Philip gestured to the tavern around them, where at least a dozen people had heard the entire conversation. "And I have something else. I am Phillip Zane, and I own Zane's mill, and I have been holding Miss Wrothe's savings in my strongbox since autumn. I know exactly how much she had, and I can testify to it in court. That was a bluff, since the stolen cash had never been in his strongbox, but the thief did not know that. He saw the trap closing around him, the witnesses, the testimony of a human mill owner, and his bravado crumbled. "I will give it back," he said quickly. "I have not spent any of it yet. It is all there. I was just joking about taking it." "Then you can give it back right now, and we will call it a mistake instead of a hanging offense," Asha said, her voice hard as stone. The man fumbled the pouch off his belt and shoved it at her, and Asha took it and counted the coins slowly, making him sweat. When she finished, she nodded. "It is all here, so we are done." "Not quite." Phillip leaned in close enough that only the thief could hear him. "You are going to leave this county, just like you said. You are going to leave today, and you are not going to come back. And if I ever hear that you stole from anyone else, particularly anyone who looks like they cannot fight back, I will make sure every magistrate between here and the sea knows your name and your crime. Do we understand each other?" The man nodded frantically and was gone within the hour, riding out on a borrowed horse with his tail between his legs. Asha and Phillip watched him go from the tavern steps, and when he was out of sight, Asha let out a long, shaky breath. "You did not have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did. You lied to him, about keeping my money, about being able to testify." "I bent the truth," Phillip corrected. "I do keep your money, just not that particular stash, and I would have testified, consequences be damned, because what he did was wrong." Asha looked down at the recovered pouch in her hands. "I was ready to give up," she admitted quietly. "When I saw that empty hole, I thought that was it, that I was going back to trusting no one and nothing. It felt easier than this." "Than what?" "Than hope." She met his eyes. "Hope is terrifying, Phillip. It means there is something to lose." He understood what she was really saying, what she was asking without words. "I know," he said, "but I think it might be worth it anyway." They rode back to the mill in the fading light, not talking but not needing to. When they arrived, Asha dismounted and stood for a moment, looking at the building that had become something more than just a place of business. Then she turned to Phillip and said, "I want to move the rest of my caches here, all of them. I do not want to spend my life digging holes and wondering who will find them. I want to trust you, not as a seventh hiding place, but as the only one." Phillip felt something in his chest expand and warm, something that might have been joy or might have been terror or might have been both. "That is a lot of trust, I know." She stepped closer. "But I think you have earned it, and I think I am tired of being alone. Asha," her name was barely a whisper, "I need you to understand what you are saying. If we do this, people will talk, they will say things. Your life will be harder because of me. My life is already hard." She reached up and cupped his face in her rough, strong hands. "But you make it easier. You make it better. You make me believe that maybe, just maybe, the world has more honest men than crooked ones. I am not that good. You are good enough." And then she kissed him, there in the mill yard with the creek singing beside them and the stars starting to come out overhead, and Phillip kissed her back like she was air and he was drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Asha rested her forehead against his. "I need to say something," she said. "Before we go any further, I am not easy to love. I am stubborn and suspicious, and I have spent so long protecting myself that I do not always know how to let someone in. But I want to try, with you, if you are willing." "Willing?" Phillip laughed, the sound shaky with emotion. "Asha, I have been in love with you since the middle of winter. I have been terrified you would leave, terrified I would mess this up, terrified of everything except the one thing I should have been saying all along. Which is, I love you." The words came out rough and true. I love your strength and your humor and your careful hands. I love the way you count coins and check fences and never trust anything until you have tested it yourself. I love that you are teaching me to be worthy of your trust. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, if you will have me." Asha's eyes were bright with tears, and her tusks showed in a wide, genuine smile. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will have you." They were married 6 weeks later, in a small ceremony at the mill with only a handful of witnesses, people who had known Philip long enough to trust his judgment, and who had come to respect Asha through her honest dealings. The magistrate who performed the ceremony was the same one who had helped recover her stolen money, and he shook both their hands afterward and wished them well. It was not a grand wedding, but it was real, and that was all either of them wanted. On their wedding night, after the guests had left and the mill was quiet, Asha led Philip out to the eastern fence post where he had first found her burying coins. She knelt and dug and brought up the final cash, the one she had kept separate all this time. She opened the oilcloth and showed him the contents, not just coins but a few small treasures, a silver ring that had been her mother's, a carving her father had made, the deed to her farm. "This was the one I was never going to move," she said. "The one I was never going to trust to anyone. But I want to trust it to you now, to us." Philip knelt beside her and took her hand. "What do you want to do with it?" "I want to invest it." She looked at the mill, solid and strong in the moonlight. "Your mill wheel needs replacing soon. You have been patching it, but it will not last another year. This money can buy a new one, a better one. And then it will not be your mill or my farm. It will be ours." "Are you certain?" he asked, because he needed her to be sure, needed her to know what she was offering. "I am certain." She pressed the oilcloth bundle into his hands. "You are not the seventh place anymore, Philip. You are the only place, the only person, the only one I trust with everything I have." He kissed her then, long and deep, with the dirt of her final cash still on both their hands and the whole future spread out before them like an unplanted field, full of possibility. When they finally pulled apart, they buried the oilcloth again, empty now, a marker of the place where Asha Wrothe had finally learned to trust, and where Phillip Zane had proven himself worthy of that trust. They walked back to the mill hand in hand, and behind them the creek ran on, turning the wheel that would soon be theirs together, grinding grain into flour, work into sustenance, fear into hope. The new mill wheel was installed before the summer harvest, and it ran truer and stronger than the old one ever had. Farmers came from 3 counties to use Zane's mill, drawn by the reputation for honest measure and fair dealing, and they found not just Philip but Asha as well, working side by side, building something that was more than the sum of its parts. There were difficulties, of course. There were customers who refused to be served by an orc, who took their business elsewhere with loud complaints. There were whispers in town, speculation about the marriage, ugly words spoken when people thought no one important was listening. But there were also neighbors who brought gifts, who offered congratulations, who judged the mill by the quality of its work and not the color of the miller's wife's skin. Asha never buried another coin. She kept the mill's accounts in a ledger, and she handled the money with the same careful attention she had always brought to her transactions. But now, when she locked the strongbox at night, Philip locked it with her, 2 keys turning in unison. The money was not hers or his. It was theirs, a shared trust, a shared future. On their first anniversary, they stood together in the mill yard and looked at what they had built. The wheel turned steadily in the creek, the building was in good repair, and there was enough put aside for a comfortable winter. More than that, there was a lightness in Asha's face that had not been there when Philip first met her, a softness that came from knowing she did not have to carry everything alone. "You ever miss it?" Phillip asked, half teasing. "The buried coins, the midnight digging, the constant vigilance." Asha pretended to consider it. "No," she said finally. "I do not miss the fear, I do not miss the loneliness, I do not miss sleeping with one eye open in case someone found my caches. What do you miss?" "Nothing." She turned to him and smiled, her tusks catching the afternoon light. "I have everything I need right here." "That is a very trusting thing for you to say." "It is." She kissed him, sweet and sure. "But you have earned it." They went inside together, leaving the mill yard empty except for the sound of water and the steady turn of the wheel. In the distance, the fence post where Asha had once buried her deepest secrets stood unmarked and ordinary, just another piece of the landscape, significant only to the two people who knew its history. And that was exactly how it should be, Phillip thought. Some stories did not need to be told to the world. Some stories only needed to be true. The years that followed were good ones, full of work and weather and the slow accumulation of a life well lived. The mill prospered, and so did the farm. Asha expanded her planting, and Phillip built an addition to the mill for storing grain through the winter. They weathered droughts and floods, lean years and fat ones, always together, always trusting. And when their first child was born on a cold spring morning, a son with his father's eyes and his mother's determined chin, they named him Marcus and wrapped him in blankets that smelled of flower and sunshine. Asha held him close and looked at Phillip with wonder in her eyes. "We made this," she said softly. "Out of trust and hope and stubbornness, we made something beautiful." Phillip kissed her forehead, then the baby's soft green skin. "We did," he agreed, "and we are not done yet." They were not done. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, red-faced and howling, and they named her Daisy. She was followed in time by another daughter, Delilah, who was quieter but no less fierce. The mill yard filled with the sounds of children playing, of laughter and arguments and the constant motion of young lives. Asha taught them to plant and harvest, to count coins and judge weight by hand. Phillip taught them to read and cipher, to fix broken things, to treat everyone with respect regardless of what they looked like. The children grew up knowing that their parents were different from most couples, that their mother's green skin and tusks made her unusual, that some people would judge them for their mixed blood. But they also grew up knowing that their parents loved each other fiercely, that the mill was built on trust and honest dealing, and that the strongest foundation for anything was the simple decision to believe in someone, and then prove yourself worthy of that belief every single day. On their 10th anniversary, Asha and Phillip walked out to the eastern fence post one last time. The oilcloth bundle was still there, buried and empty, a marker of a woman who had once trusted nothing and no one. Asha dug it up, held it in her hands for a moment, and then looked at Phillip. "I think we can let this go now," she said. "I do not need a reminder anymore. Are you sure?" "I am sure." She tossed the rotted oilcloth into the creek and watched it float away, carried by the current that turned their mill wheel day after day, year after year. "I have everything I need to remember right here. The mill, the farm, the children. You." Phillip pulled her close, and they stood together in the gathering dusk, watching the creek flow and the wheel turn and the life they had built together continue on, solid and true. There were no more buried coins, no more midnight caches, no more fear. There was only trust, hard-won and carefully kept, the foundation of everything that mattered. "I love you," Asha said, and the words were easy now, worn smooth by repetition, but no less true for all that. "I love you too," Phillip answered, and meant it with everything he had. They walked back to the mill together, hand in hand, leaving the fence post behind them. In the distance, they could hear their children playing, Marcus chasing his sisters through the yard while they shrieked with laughter. The mill wheel turned, steady and strong. The creek sang its endless song. And above them, the stars came out one by one, bearing witness to a love that had started with buried coins and grown into something that no bank vault could ever hold, something precious beyond measure, something that would last.